You ever feel like you're stuck on a bit of a hamster wheel, always busy, always on the go, and yet not making the progress that you want to see in life? Maybe you feel like you're in this constant loop of not being productive because you need a break, but not allowing yourself to take a break because you have so much to do. Or maybe you simply feel like you just don't have enough time for everything and it's really overwhelming. If you relate to any of this, then this video is for you. About 5 years ago, that was me. I was struggling with both productivity and self-care and didn't know how to find the balance between the two. But rest assured, it is possible. And so in today's video, I wanted to share some of the mindset shifts and frameworks that have really helped me restructure how I approach both of these things and really nail it down so that I can intentionally design the life that I want. Now, over the past few years, I feel like both productivity and self-care have become these kind of buzzwords, and I feel like when that happens, sometimes we kind of lose the original meaning or real purpose of those words, and so I want to start there. First, what is productivity? Now, obviously, you probably have some preconceived notions of what productivity means to you, but let's take it back to the dictionary definition, or should I say Google's definition. Google defines it as the effectiveness of effort as measured in terms of the rate of output per unit of input. What does that mean? First thing I think is important to know is that it says nothing about the amount of effort, which I think a lot of us tend to correlate with productivity of like how hard we work, how much we're hustling, how many hours we're putting in. And that's simply not the case. What productivity actually is about is how effective the effort that you are putting in is. Basically, are you working smarter or harder? So I got fancy and I made this little diagram for you. Basically, on one side we have our inputs, and then on the other side we have our outputs, and in the middle is our system, which is basically our way of doing things, our habits, our processes, our systems, etc. Now, the input is everything that we put into that system, so that could be time, money, energy, effort, any resources that we have essentially that we're putting in there. And then the output is the result. So what are we getting out of all of that effort? What is the final outcome? And when we break it down this way, we start to kind of see how we can possibly improve or decrease our productivity. If we start with the assumption that like one unit, whatever unit means, right? If it's 1 hour or one kind of like unit of energy, if we assume that 1 unit of input results in 1 unit of output, then it's kind of like a 1-to-1 ratio of effort to output. But what if we changed our system, right? That middle piece of whatever happens in between, what if we change that so that when we put in 1 unit of input, we actually get 2 or 3 units of output? That makes the system more productive because you're putting in the same amount of effort but getting more results. On the flip side, what if you put in 3 units of effort, for example, to putting 3 hours into studying for an exam or into doing some work, and you're only getting 1 unit of output because you're tired? That would make that system much less productive because you're putting in 3 and you're only getting 1. So when we look at the system this way, we kind of start to understand how we can make ourselves more productive by changing that system so that we could either decrease the amount of effort and get the same amount of output, or by putting in the same amount of effort and actually getting more output. And that's productivity in a nutshell, really. It's about asking how we can use fewer of our precious resources, time, energy, effort, money even, and get more results from it. This was a huge turning point for me because when we think of productivity in this way, it inherently disentangles the concept of being productive from hustle and burnout and all of that kind of negativity that we have sometimes come to associate with productivity as well, because we tend to talk about them and act as if they're the same thing when they're not. It's such a pet peeve of mine, to be honest, because it's hurting you to believe that productivity and hustle and burnout are the same thing. Anyways, if you want a full video kind of going more into depth about the difference between productivity and putting in some hard work versus hustle culture and burnout culture, then let me know because I would love to ramble about that some more. But for now, let's move on to the second part, which is what is self-care? Again, you might have your own version or your own personal definition of self-care, which is great, but just so that we're all on the same page for the context of this video, I'm gonna give another definition. Self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. Now, I love this definition for 2 reasons. One, it clarifies what counts as a self-care activity, and it kind of helps us really separate self-care from like indulgence. And two, it expands our mind a little bit so that we can kind of come up with new ideas of what self-care practices could look like for us personally, as opposed to kind of the capitalist marketed version of self-care. I think it's important to know that self-care is not just about doing things that make you feel good. It's not just pampering yourself or indulging in something or giving yourself a little treat. All of those things can surely overlap with self-care, I think. It's really thinking what's best for you from a holistic, healthy perspective. I almost like to think of it as like if there was this like third party bird's eye view perspective of my life from the perspective of someone who just loves and cares for me so deeply and just truly wants me to like thrive and have the best life possible. Someone who has this infinite amount of love. If they were to look down on my like little human self and what I'm doing, what would they have me do in that moment? What would they consider is self-care? Because a lot of the times that doesn't actually look like what we've been conditioned to think is self-care, bubble baths, candles, treating ourselves, you know, things like that. Sometimes it's cleaning your house or doing your laundry or going to the gym when you don't feel like it. The key, I think, to self-care is that it comes from a perspective, of course, of love and care. Okay, so now that we're on the same page about what productivity and self-care actually mean, let's talk about how we can balance both of them in our lives. Oftentimes, I feel like people talk about productivity and self-care as if they're like these two opposite ends of a spectrum, and that as you move closer to productivity, you get further away from self-care, and as you move closer to self-care, you get further away from productivity. But I don't think that's the case. My belief, and actually my life experience has taught me that it's the opposite. They actually work hand in hand and support each other. It's like they're like these two overlapping circles, like a Venn diagram, where you can either live just with productivity or just with self-care, or you can find that space where they overlap and live in there. Now, if you're in the productivity only section, which is where I feel like a lot of people tend to gravitate towards because that's what's societally rewarded, it's likely that you're experiencing high levels of stress, anxiety, burnout, restlessness, that hamster wheel feeling that we were talking about before. Whereas if you're in the self-care only section and you're not experiencing the productivity as well, then you might be feeling like there's a bit of a lack of progress on your goals. You might be feeling a little aimless, like you're unsure of where to focus, and just feeling like you're not living up to the potential that lives inside of you. But when we can find that sweet spot in the middle where we can embrace both and see how they actually work together, that's where we can experience things like flow, ease, and alignment. The trick here is really just to start somewhere. Pick productivity or pick self-care, whichever you feel has been a little bit more neglected on your part, and invest into that for a little, so that instead of having that negative cycle of like not taking care of yourself so you feel too tired or unfocused and then your productivity suffers, and then because your productivity is suffering, your work is suffering, and then you have less time to actually do the self-care. Instead of having that negative cycle, why not give yourself some time, find a way to invest into whichever one you feel is lacking the most, and then you can get into the cycle instead of taking care of yourself, boosting your energy, boosting your focus, which then positively affects your ability to focus, your ability to get things done effectively, efficiently, quickly, so that your productivity goes up and then you have some leftover resources, the time, the energy, whatever it is, to then put back into your self-care. I feel like that's ultimately the goal of productivity. It's not just to get as much work done as possible, it's to decrease those resources that we're putting into that system like we were talking about before, and then you have those extra resources left over to use in other ways other than work, putting it back into your self-care, putting it into your relationships, using it for hobbies, all these other ways that we want to use our time, energy, effort, attention, money. And I think that's ultimately the end goal of being productive, to have resources for the rest of your life. So I mean, all of this is just my personal take and perspective on this, but I truly feel like when we can stop seeing productivity and self-care as these opposites and instead seeing them as partners in making your life better, that's when balancing our life becomes so much easier. We no longer have this like internal battle, and we can release the guilt that often comes with taking care of ourselves. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or even maybe a little bit enlightening. I know know these ideas definitely were for me when I first started thinking about things this way. If you have any other specific topics or questions that you would like me to address, then definitely let me know in the comments and I would be happy to do that. If you like this video, I think there's another video I created that you would also like called How to Prioritize Better. I'll link it above somewhere for you to watch next. As always, thank you so much for watching and for supporting my young, growing channel. I think at time of recording, we are like just under 800 subscribers, which just like blows my mind. Anyways, I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye.